I can't say that everything about this movie worked for me personally. It was a bit of a mixed bag. But one thing is for sure, and there is one thing that I really liked, and it's a quote from this movie that I will be stealing, and I will use it in the future towards people who get upset at me about movie opinions. If you are one of those people, expect to hear the pain will leave you once it's finished teaching you. Let's discuss.
I watch so you don't have to.
Before I get started, I'd like to kindly ask that you hit the like button, and please subscribe to the channel for more content just like this.
Come on. Do it! Do it!
Monkey Man follows a young man who ekes out a meager living in an underground fight club where, night after night, wearing a gorilla mask, he's beaten bloody by more popular fighters for money. After years of suppressed rage, he discovers a way to infiltrate his city's sinister elite and sets out on a crusade to extract revenge on those who caused him significant trauma when he was a child. Okay, so right off the bat, you can obviously tell from that synopsis that the general idea of this movie isn't far off from your typical revenge movie story. I think where this movie sets itself apart from all the others is with its main character, played by Dev Patel, who also directed the film, by the way, so kudos to him for pulling double duty. I think his character was set up and established throughout the course of this film in such a unique way. This film doesn't really waste a whole lot of time, and it immediately drops you into his story, where his plan for revenge is already in motion.
Don't waste my motherfucking time!
A lot of times in movies like this, movies like John Wick for instance, especially in the later sequels of that franchise, the hero feels invincible at times. They are typically put in situations where it's not believable in the slightest that they could come out of them unscathed. And that's part of the reason why it's been difficult for me personally to connect with a character like John Wick. In this movie, however, this character is very flawed. Things do not always go his way, especially early on. His issue is that he's reacting out of pure rage, instead of taking a more focused approach to accomplish his goal. They put him through a great deal of punishment throughout this film, as expected, but in this situation it's a bit more believable that he could survive and come back from all of it. And I think it's because they establish his character very early on as someone who is able to take a beating, thanks to him being a human punching bag in underground fight clubs.
I'm gonna go pick a fight.
Plus, I just found his story, his struggle, his reason for wanting revenge to be more interesting and frankly more heartbreaking than I was expecting. The first half of this movie is essentially building to this reveal of what actually happened to him as a child. It's the reason for his pent-up rage. It's the reason, presumably, why he puts himself through so much physical punishment. It's all a part of his sacrifice to avenge someone that he loved. And I thought that Dev Patel did an amazing job from an acting perspective, relaying that pain and relaying that rage. He says so much as an actor without saying much at all. A lot of his acting is in his eyes, and it's subtle. And I found it refreshing to once again have this throwback character who is a man of few words, who also just so happens to have a decent story around him.
I don't believe it!
The action sequences in this film mostly consist of fight scenes, obviously. And most of the fight scenes outside of the Fight Club stuff were pretty standard when it comes to your typical revenge flick hand-to-hand combat. This movie has a very unique way of shooting its action, and I also noticed this in some of its dialogue scenes as well. The camera work in this movie is very frantic, to say the least. I'm assuming this was a purposeful, creative choice to make the audience feel uneasy, but it's almost too chaotic at times and confusing, and I think it's possible that it could turn some people off. I liked it at first, but even with me, after a while, it started to wear on me and I kind of wished that they stopped doing it. It kind of reminded me of the coked out montage at the end of Goodfellas, turned up to 11. Again, it works for one scene when you're trying to make the characters and the audience feel a certain type of way in that moment. But I don't know if a lot of cuts, choppiness, and movement is going to have the same effect when it's done throughout the entire course of the film.
That makes sense.
As far as my favorite part of this film, it was easily the sequences in the underground fight club. The whole vibe of these scenes worked for me, everything from the visual style to the music. In fact, they use music pretty effectively through most of this film. But seeing the underground fight club scenes made me kind of wish that they focused on that through the whole movie. Honestly, I could have done without the whole revenge plotline. In fact, it might have even been better if it was relayed in a different setting, especially if it meant spending more time in this dirty and dingy ring. There were even a couple of shots in these scenes that gave me serious Raging Bull vibes. More towards the end of the film is where it starts to get a little bit weird for me.
Why do these things always happen to me?
There's this whole sequence where he's taken in by this random group of people who nurse him back to health and teach him how to fight properly and work through his rage. And this whole portion of the film kind of felt like it brought everything to a standstill. It honestly just kind of disrupted the whole pacing of the movie for me, and there were even times where I got a little bored with it. I understand why it's there, and we do get a decent training montage contained within it that's always enjoyable, but it also feels like it kind of comes out of left field, and there's also a little bit of shoehorning of political, social, and religious commentary that I'm not entirely sure is consistent with what we got in the rest of the film.
Message!
As far as the end of the film, you're expecting an all-out brawl given the circumstances, and that's pretty much what you get. But also, I couldn't help but feel a bit underwhelmed when it was all said and done. I didn't even feel like the villains of the film receiving their comeuppance was remotely as satisfying as it should have been. I guess I was just expecting a little bit more when it comes to resolving that conflict. The ending also felt kind of rushed to me, which is weird to say for a movie that does a decent job of setting everything up. But yeah, it honestly kind of felt like they just breezed through to an inevitable conclusion that left me wanting more.
How can you not care?
Like this.
Overall, I can't say that I was blown away by Monkey Man, but I'm not upset that I watched it either. Honestly, it does a lot of things right. It's entertaining, it's interesting at times, it has pretty great performances, and has some unexpectedly effective comedic moments as well. I just felt like things got a little bit too weird and went off the rails a little bit in the later portions of the film. So for me, it just didn't stick the landing in the most satisfying way. For me, it was a enjoyable yet flawed experience, and that's why I feel comfortable giving it the Cathouse.
Saved by kitty litter.
Y'all be cool. Shut up.